I heard the crash before I even made it to my morning coffee. A loud, gut-wrenching scrape of metal against concrete, followed by an ear-piercing honk that made my dog yelp and bolt under the table. I rushed to the front door, my heart pounding, already expecting the worst. And there she was, Karen, her SUV wedged halfway onto my lawn, the front bumper kissing my flower bed like it was on a romantic getaway. She was standing outside, arms crossed, her face twisted in an expression of pure outrage, as if I had personally offended her entire bloodline. "What the hell is this?" she screeched, pointing at the low wooden fence I had put up just yesterday. "You blocked the shortcut. I've been using this driveway for months. Do you know how much time I lose by going the long way around?" I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. My driveway, my property, and she was yelling at me, like I had vandalized her car instead of the other way around. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level, but it wasn't easy. "Karen, this is my driveway, not a public road. You have no right to drive through here," she scoffed, waving her perfectly manicured hand like I was some insignificant insect. "That's ridiculous. The HOA allows it. Everyone knows this is the fastest way out of the neighborhood. Why are you being so difficult?" I resisted the urge to laugh in sheer disbelief. "The HOA doesn't own my property, Karen. I do. And I'm sick of you treating my driveway like a shortcut." Her expression darkened, and she leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a condescending whisper. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't care what little rules you think apply here. I've been living in this neighborhood for 15 years. You're just the newbie trying to change things. It won't work. This driveway has always been the shortcut, and it always will be." I clenched my fists. This woman was unreal. I had been dealing with her nonsense for months, seeing her car speed through my property, watching her tear up my gravel path without a second thought, having her dismiss every attempt I made to stop her. I tried everything. I put up cones. She moved them. I installed a small gate. She knocked it over. I even sent footage of her blatant trespassing to the HOA, only to be met with shrugged shoulders and muttered excuses. "Karen's been here forever. We can't just change things now." And now, here she was again, acting like she had every right to be furious at me for putting an end to her free ride. "I'm calling the HOA," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "They'll deal with this." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Go ahead. Call them. Let's see how that works out for you." She narrowed her eyes, then stomped back to her car and struggled to reverse out of my lawn, leaving deep, muddy tire marks in her wake. I watched as she sped off, my blood boiling, my hands trembling with frustration. This wasn't just a battle over a driveway anymore. This was war. Later that afternoon, the HOA sent an email, a formal notice. Not for Karen, for me. "Dear homeowner, we have received complaints regarding unauthorized modifications to community access pathways. The recent fence installation on your property has been deemed disruptive to neighborhood traffic patterns. We kindly ask that you remove it immediately to maintain community harmony. Sincerely, HOA Board." I stared at the screen, rage bubbling up inside me like a volcano ready to explode. Unauthorized modifications? Community harmony? They were seriously siding with Karen on this. I marched straight to the HOA office, determined to give them a piece of my mind. But the moment I walked in, I saw her sitting smugly in the corner, chatting with the board members like they were old friends. She shot me a victorious smirk, as if she already knew how this was going to play out. Mr. Walker," the HOA president said, barely glancing up from his stack of papers. "We were just discussing your, landscaping alterations." I crossed my arms. "You mean the fence I put up to keep Karen from illegally driving through my property?" A few awkward coughs, a few exchanged glances. Then one of them spoke up. "It's just that. Well, Karen has been using that path for years. It's sort of a neighborhood tradition." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So let me get this straight. My property is apparently community property now? She has no right to use my driveway." Another nervous glance between the board members. The president cleared his throat. "Well, technically no, but nothing." I cut in. "You're telling me she gets to destroy my lawn, endanger my family, and you're siding with her because of some tradition?" Karen gave a fake little laugh. "Oh, come on. It's just a little shortcut. You're being dramatic." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I could fight this all day and get nowhere. The HOA was in Karen's pocket, and they weren't going to budge. It was time for a different approach, something bigger, something that would make sure she never set foot or tire on my property again. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the ruined stretch of grass where Karen's car had torn through earlier. My mind raced with ideas. A taller fence. No, she'd find a way around it. Motion sensors? She'd complain to the HOA. Maybe cameras with alarms? No, I needed something better, something that would drive her absolutely insane. Then it hit me. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. A hedge maze. Not just any hedge maze, a real, twisted, confusing labyrinth that would trap her like a rat in a cage. I could already picture it. High walls of dense, thick greenery, endless dead ends, tricky turns, a masterpiece of frustration. If Karen wanted to keep using my property as her shortcut, fine. Let's see how she enjoyed getting lost in it. The next morning, I made some calls. I found the perfect landscaper, one who specialized in fast-growing, hardy hedges. When I explained my idea, he let out a deep chuckle and said, "That's the pettiest thing I've ever heard. I love it." And just like that, the plan was in motion. Karen had no idea what was coming. I spent the next few days planning every detail of the hedge maze. This wasn't just going to be some simple row of bushes blocking my driveway. No, this was going to be a full-fledged labyrinth of confusion and frustration. If Karen thought she could use my property as a shortcut, she was about to learn the hard way that some paths aren't worth taking. First, I needed the right hedges. Not just any bushes would do. I wanted something dense, fast-growing, and nearly impossible to push through. After some research, I found the perfect solution: Japanese boxwood. It grew thick, could be trimmed into precise shapes, and best of all, it was known for its resilience. Once it was fully grown, it would be like running into a wall of green. The landscaper I hired was immediately intrigued by my plan. When I told him I needed an elaborate hedge maze instead of a simple fence, he paused for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "I've built a lot of things in my career," he said, shaking his head. "But this might be the most delightfully petty project I've ever worked on." I grinned. I need it to be effective, confusing enough that anyone who enters won't find their way out easily. "Oh, don't worry," he said. "We'll make sure your unwanted visitor regrets ever trying to use your driveway again." The work began immediately. First, we laid out the design, making sure it was just complex enough to be frustrating but not impossible to navigate. The entrance would look like a normal driveway at first glance, luring Karen into a false sense of security. But as soon as she turned in, she'd be met with a fork in the road, one path leading to a dead end, another looping her right back where she started. From there, it only got worse. Hidden turns, tight corners, sudden dead ends that looked like they led somewhere, but actually didn't. And just for the fun of it, a few openings that led straight back to where she entered. It would be like a living, breathing puzzle, constantly changing as the hedges grew taller and thicker. By the third day, the first section of the hedge maze was already taking shape. The landscaper worked fast, planting the shrubs in carefully planned patterns, leaving space for growth but ensuring the structure was solid from the start. Every time I walked outside to check on the progress, I could already imagine Karen's reaction when she tried to take her usual shortcut and found herself trapped in a green nightmare. That evening, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, I saw her SUV roll by slowly. She hadn't attempted to use my driveway since our last argument, but I could tell she was watching, waiting. She still believed the HOA would force me to take down the fence, and once they did, she'd be right back to her old ways. I just smiled to myself. Let her believe that. Let her think she had won. By the end of the week, the maze was complete. It still needed time to grow taller, but the pathways were already confusing enough to be effective. To add the final touch, I placed a small wooden sign near the entrance. Nothing too dramatic, just a simple, elegant message that read, "Shortcut closed. Welcome to the Maze of Doom." The next morning, I didn't have to wait long. I was inside enjoying my breakfast when I heard the familiar sound of Karen's SUV, the low rumble of the engine, the confident way she always sped into my driveway like she owned it. Except this time, she wasn't met with an open path. There was a long, satisfying silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of tires crunching against gravel as she hesitated. I imagined her sitting in her car, staring at the maze in confusion, trying to process what she was looking at. Then, as I expected, she made the worst possible decision. She drove in. I put down my coffee and walked over to the window, peeking out just in time to see her SUV disappear into the hedge maze. A grin stretched across my face. She was inside, and she had no idea what she had just gotten herself into. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove cautiously, probably thinking I had just rearranged the landscaping and left an open path somewhere. But within seconds, I saw the first sign of panic. Her brake lights flickered as she realized she was at a dead end. She backed up, tried another path, another dead end. A few seconds later, the real fun began. She started reversing too quickly, almost hitting one of the hedges. Then she lurched forward again, turning sharply, only to find herself at another dead end. From my window, I could just barely make out the frustrated movement of her hands on the steering wheel. Then the horn, one loud, angry blast, followed by another. I stifled a laugh. She was honking at my hedge maze like it was going to magically move out of her way. A few more minutes passed, and then I heard the door slam. Karen had given up trying to drive out. She was getting out of her car to navigate the maze on foot. Even better, I stepped outside, casually leaning against my porch railing as I watched her stomp around in frustration. She disappeared behind a hedge, then reappeared a moment later in the exact same spot she had started. She let out an angry groan, then turned another way, only to end up at the same dead end again. It was beautiful. I could see her reaching for her phone, probably to call the HOA or even the police, but there wasn't much they could do. She wasn't trespassing in the traditional sense. She had entered on her own free will, and now she was paying the price for it. After another 10 minutes, she finally found her way out. Her hair was a mess, her face red with anger, and the second she saw me, she stormed over, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "This," she hissed, "is harassment." I raised an eyebrow. "Harassment, Karen? I didn't force you to drive into the hedge maze. That was all you." Her eyes burned with fury. "You know exactly what you did. This is an abuse of landscaping. I'm reporting you to the HOA. I let out a low whistle. An abuse of landscaping? That's a new one. Go ahead, Karen. Report me. She let out a frustrated growl, stomped back to her car, and sped off. But I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to let things go. She would fight this, find a way to twist the situation in her favor. But what she didn't know was that I was ready for every move she was about to make. Because this wasn't just about blocking a shortcut anymore. This was a game, and I was going to win. Karen was not the type to let things go. I knew that the second she stormed off, her face redder than a stop sign. The next morning, I wasn't surprised when I opened my inbox and saw a fresh email from the HOA. Another complaint, another demand, another absurd accusation that made me laugh out loud. "Dear homeowner, we have received multiple reports concerning an obstruction affecting the accessibility of neighborhood pathways. It has come to our attention that an elaborate hedge structure has been placed in a manner that disrupts natural traffic flow. Please be advised that failure to comply with HOA regulations may result in further action." It was almost cute how they were trying to dress up their bias in formal language. Karen had obviously wasted no time running straight to her HOA friends, playing the victim, spinning some ridiculous story about how my landscaping was somehow a crime. I could already picture her standing in the HOA office, hands on her hips, demanding that they do something about the public safety hazard growing in my yard. I decided to handle it the same way I handled the last complaint, with sheer, unshakable logic. I typed back my response. "Dear HOA, thank you for your concern regarding my landscaping. Please note that the hedge structure is entirely on my private property, well within legal guidelines, and is classified as a decorative landscape feature. I appreciate the HOA's dedication to neighborhood aesthetics, and I assure you that the hedge maze enhances the visual appeal of my property while respecting all zoning laws. I look forward to your response." I sent it and leaned back, sipping my coffee. They had no real authority over this. The HOA wasn't some supreme court of the neighborhood. They had rules, sure, but they couldn't dictate what I did on my own land, and I was going to make sure they knew that. Karen, however, was far from done. That afternoon, I was outside trimming some of the hedges when I saw her standing at the end of her driveway, glaring at me like she was trying to burn holes through my skull with her eyes. I ignored her, whistling as I worked, but I could feel her presence like an annoying fly buzzing in the background. Then, like clockwork, she marched over, her heels clicking dramatically against the pavement. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You think you're clever, don't you?" I smiled. "I do, actually. Thanks for noticing." Her nostrils flared. "The HOA is going to force you to take this stupid maze down." I shrugged. "Doubt it. Everything I did is within the rules." She took a deep breath, like she was trying to calm herself, then changed tactics. "Look, I don't want to fight with you. Let's just be reasonable adults. The shortcut has been there for years. People rely on it. You're making things difficult for everyone. I tilted my head. Define everyone. Because as far as I can tell, the only person upset about this is you. Her eye twitched. You have no idea how much you're inconveniencing people. I gestured to the empty street. Oh yeah? Where's the angry mob, Karen? Where's the neighborhood outrage? Because all I see is one person mad that she can't cut through my yard anymore. She clenched her jaw so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back into her house. That should have been the end of it, but Karen wasn't built to accept defeat. The very next day, I caught her standing at the maze entrance with a pair of garden shears in her hand, ready to hack her way through like some suburban Indiana Jones. I leaned against my porch and watched, sipping my drink like I was enjoying a live show. Karen, I called out, before you start a massacre, you might want to check the neighborhood rules about damaging someone else's property. She froze, her grip tightening on the shears. This is obstruction, she argued, though there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. I have every right. Wrong, I interrupted. That's destruction of private property. Pretty sure that's illegal. She hesitated for a moment, then huffed and stormed back inside. But I knew she was fuming, plotting, trying to figure out her next move. Later that evening, she escalated things in the most Karen way possible. She called the cops. I was inside watching TV when I saw the red and blue lights flash through my window. I sighed, already knowing what was coming. Sure enough, when I stepped outside, Karen was standing there, smug as ever, with two officers looking mildly confused. Officers, she began, her voice dripping with false politeness. Thank you for coming. I'd like to report an obstruction of community access. One of the officers turned to me, raising an eyebrow. Sir, what exactly is going on here? I gestured to the hedge maze. This is my driveway. Karen used to drive through it without my permission, so I installed a hedge maze to stop her. The officer blinked. A hedge maze. A hedge maze, I confirmed. He looked back at Karen, clearly trying to suppress a sigh. Ma'am, is this hedge maze on his property? She scoffed. That's not the point. It's causing a disturbance. He's making it impossible for me to use the shortcut. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, do you have a legal right to use his driveway? She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing she had just walked into a trap. No, I answered for her, smiling. She doesn't. The officer nodded, clearly over it. Well then, there's no crime here. It's his property. He can do what he wants with it. Karen sputtered. But it's unreasonable. It's childish. He's doing this just to spite me. The officer gave her a tired look. Ma'am, being annoying isn't a crime. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Karen, realizing she had lost yet again, crossed her arms and let out a dramatic huff. Fine, whatever. But this isn't over. The officers gave me a nod and left. Karen, still fuming, stomped back into her house. I went inside, stretched out on my couch, and grinned up at the ceiling. The hedge maze had done its job. It had trapped her, frustrated her, and now it had even wasted her time by bringing in the cops for nothing. But I knew this wasn't over, not with someone like Karen. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate. And desperate people, they always made things worse for themselves. The next morning, I expected Karen to be quiet, maybe even sulking after her failed attempt with the cops. But I had underestimated her ability to escalate things beyond logic. Instead of backing down, she did what any entitled HOA tyrant would do. She went straight for the nuclear option. At exactly 9 in the morning, I heard a knock on my door, followed by an all-too-familiar voice barking orders. When I opened the door, there stood the HOA president, Mr. Dunlap, a stiff-looking man in his 60s with thinning hair and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Karen stood beside him, arms crossed, an infuriating smirk on her face, as if she had already won. Mr. Walker, Dunlap started, clearing his throat. We need to have a discussion about your landscaping choices. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Discussion? Or another attempt at forcing me to get rid of my maze? Karen let out a dramatic sigh. We gave you plenty of warnings. You refused to listen. Dunlap shot her a look, then turned back to me. The HOA has voted. Your hedge maze is considered an unauthorized obstruction, and we are issuing a formal demand for its removal. I stared at him, then at Karen, who looked like she had just won an Olympic gold medal in pettiness. An unauthorized obstruction? I repeated, unable to hold back a laugh. That's interesting, because last I checked, my property isn't owned by the HOA. Dunlap shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Well, technically, that's true, but HOA guidelines allow us to enforce regulations that affect the overall flow and safety of the neighborhood. Safety, I echoed. Please tell me how a bunch of hedges is a safety issue. Karen jumped in, her voice dripping with fake concern. Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fact that someone could get lost in it? Or worse, what if emergency vehicles need access? You're creating a hazard. I let out a slow breath, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. Let me get this straight. You're worried about an emergency vehicle needing to use my private driveway? Because I'm pretty sure that's not how public roads work. Dunlap straightened his shoulders. This isn't up for debate. You have 1 week to remove the maze, or you'll be fined. I smiled. And what if I refuse? Karen's smirk widened. Then the HOA will take legal action. And trust me, you don't want to go up against us. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider their threat. Then, without another word, I reached inside my house, grabbed a folder, and handed it to Dunlap. He frowned, flipping it open. His expression changed almost instantly as he scanned the papers. What? What is this? Property zoning laws, I said casually. City landscaping regulations. A formal statement from a lawyer confirming that since my hedge maze is decorative landscaping and doesn't exceed the city's height restrictions, it is completely legal and untouchable by the HOA. Dunlap's face paled slightly as he read through the documents. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. No, she muttered, shaking her head. No, this isn't right. The HOA has authority. Only over shared spaces, I cut in. Not over privately owned land. And certainly not over a hedge maze that is fully compliant with city ordinances. Dunlap let out a slow breath, clearly trying to figure out a way around it, but there wasn't one. I had made sure of that. Finally, he closed the folder and sighed. We'll have to review this. Take your time, I said cheerfully. But just so we're clear, if you try to find me over this, I will be the first to take legal action against the HOA for harassment. Karen looked like she was about to explode. Dunlap muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked away. Karen, however, lingered, her nails digging into her arms as she stared at me. This isn't over, she hissed. I grinned. Oh, I'm counting on that. She stomped off, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I shut the door, shaking my head. She was furious, humiliated, and now backed into a corner. There was no way she was going to let this go. And I was right. 2 days later, I caught her outside my maze again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had hired a landscaping company. I stepped outside just as 2 workers were unloading equipment from a truck. Karen spotted me and smirked. Oh good, you're here. This will save us time. I folded my arms. And what exactly are you doing? She waved a hand at the workers. I've hired professionals to remove this mess. You had your fun, but it's time to be an adult about this. I let out a laugh. Wow, you really don't get it, do you? She turned to the workers. Go ahead, boys. One of them hesitated. Ma'am, are you the property owner? Karen's smugness flickered. I'm on the HOA board. The landscaper frowned. That's not what I asked. I decided to put her out of her misery. She's not the owner. I am. The workers exchanged glances, then one of them turned back to Karen. Yeah, sorry ma'am, but we can't do anything without the owner's permission. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. I am ordering you to remove this. The landscaper shrugged. And I'm telling you legally, I can't. I leaned against the porch railing. You should probably leave before I call the cops for trespassing. Karen clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, in a move so unhinged I almost didn't believe it was happening, she grabbed a pair of hedge clippers from the truck and marched toward the maze herself. I pulled out my phone. Great idea, Karen. Keep going. Let's see how much damage you can do before the police get here. She froze, her grip tightening around the clippers. You wouldn't. Oh, I absolutely would. I turned the camera toward her. I'm sure the cops would love to see footage of you vandalizing private property. For a long moment, she just stood there, her body trembling with barely contained rage. Then, with a guttural scream of frustration, she threw the clippers down and stormed back to her house. The landscapers packed up and left. I put my phone away, smiling to myself. She had officially run out of options. That night, I sat on my porch watching the stars, enjoying the peace and quiet. The shortcut was officially dead. The HOA had no power over me. And Karen? She was out of tricks. Or so I thought. Because just when I thought the battle was over, she decided to do something even more desperate. And this time, she was going to make her biggest mistake yet. I should have known Karen wasn't done. She had exhausted every reasonable and unreasonable option, bullying the HOA into fining me, calling the cops, hiring landscapers, and even trying to destroy my maze herself. None of it worked. But Karen wasn't the type to walk away from a fight, especially when her ego was on the line. I just didn't expect her to go full-blown criminal. It happened in the dead of night. I was fast asleep when I heard the sound of rustling outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some stray animal wandering through the yard. But then came the snapping sound, sharp, deliberate, a sound that didn't belong. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. Grabbing my phone, I pulled up my security camera feed. The grainy black and white footage confirmed my suspicions immediately. A figure was moving through the hedge maze. Not just moving, hacking. There was a distinct glint of metal, the motion of someone wildly swinging a tool. Karen. I couldn't believe it. She was actually out there, in my yard, in the middle of the night, cutting through my maze like some deranged hedge assassin. I sat there for a second, blinking at the screen, almost impressed by her sheer commitment to insanity. Then I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my shoes, and headed outside. The second I stepped onto my porch, I heard her muttering curses, frustration, the sound of a woman completely unhinged. I followed the noise through the maze, turning corners, taking my time, knowing that she was making the one mistake I had counted on all along. She was lost. By the time I reached the center of the maze, I found her standing in a small clearing, sweat dripping down her face, her hair a tangled mess. She was panting, gripping a pair of heavy-duty garden shears like they were weapons. All around her, there were unevenly cut sections of the hedge, the damage looking more like a wild animal had attacked than a planned act of destruction. I leaned against one of the hedge walls, folding my arms. Karen. She spun around so fast she nearly tripped. Her eyes went wide, her face twisted in panic before shifting to something harder, more defiant. "This is illegal," she spat. You tricked me." I raised an eyebrow. "Tricked you?" "Karen, you broke into my yard and started hacking away at my property in the middle of the night." She pointed at me, her entire body shaking with fury. "You forced me to do this. You left me no choice." I stared at her, utterly fascinated by her logic. "You had no choice but to trespass onto my land and commit vandalism?" She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process how ridiculous that sounded. "You don't understand," she finally muttered. "That shortcut has been there forever. You think you can just move in and take it away?" I sighed. "Karen, it was never yours. It's my property." Her jaw clenched. "This isn't over." I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. The camera app was open, still recording. "Oh, I think it is." The color drained from her face. She looked from the screen to the shears in her hand, then back at the hedge walls surrounding us. Her breathing turned ragged. She was stuck, caught red-handed. There was no way out. And then, in true Karen fashion, she tried to run. She took off down the maze, but her own destruction had only made things worse for her. In her attempt to chop her way through, she had made the pathways even more confusing. Dead ends that shouldn't have existed, twisted corners that led nowhere. It was a disaster of her own making. I followed at a leisurely pace, not rushing, letting her wear herself out. I could hear her grunting, cursing under her breath, her frustration mounting with every wrong turn. Finally, after what felt like a full 5 minutes of her running in circles, she burst out of the maze and collapsed onto my driveway, gasping for air. I walked up behind her, holding up my phone again. "So, should I call the cops? Or do you want to do it yourself?" She groaned, rolling onto her back, staring up at the sky like the universe had personally betrayed her. "This isn't fair," she whispered. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered the months of entitlement, the threats, the attempts to bully me, the sheer audacity of her actions. No, she had earned this. I called the cops. By the time they arrived, Karen had pulled herself together just enough to try and play the victim. "I was confused," she told them. "I got lost. I didn't mean to destroy anything." I wordlessly handed them my phone, playing back the footage of her chopping away at my hedges with pure, unfiltered rage. The officers exchanged glances. One of them sighed. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage." Karen's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of you cutting through this man's hedges at 2 in the morning." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. For once in her life, she was speechless. They cuffed her and put her in the back of the squad car. As they drove away, I let out a long, satisfied breath. The war was over. The next few days were glorious. The HOA, now publicly embarrassed, scrambled to distance themselves from Karen. She was removed from the board, her reputation in ruins. Without her constant interference, the neighborhood actually became more peaceful. Even better, my hedge maze became something of a local attraction. Kids started using it as a play area. Families came by to take pictures. Some of the neighbors even asked me for tips on how to build their own hedge structures. Then came Halloween. I had originally built the maze as a form of revenge, but now it had another purpose. I decked it out with spooky decorations, added some fog machines, and turned it into the perfect haunted maze for trick-or-treaters. People loved it. Word spread, and soon my house was the highlight of the neighborhood. Karen, on the other hand, stayed quiet. After her arrest, she kept to herself, avoiding eye contact whenever she passed my house. I'd see her peek through her blinds sometimes, but she never said a word to me again. Then one night, just as I was about to turn off my porch light, I saw something that nearly made me choke on my drink. Karen, standing at the entrance of my hedge maze. She wasn't trying to destroy it this time. She wasn't trying to drive through it. She was just staring. And then, before I could even process what I was seeing, she took a slow step forward and disappeared into the maze. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then finally, I heard a frustrated groan from deep inside the hedges. She was lost. I smiled, shook my head, and closed my door. Some people never learn.